teaching yourself and learning what the opposition is saying, or what these new teachings are. I think that it's just going to be one of those things that the more you understand it, the more you go, huh? That's what's being taught, and it just doesn't seem so scary anymore because you realize how incoherent it is.
My guest today is Hillary Morgan Ferrer, and she's the author of Mama Bear Apologetics. And today, Hillary will be giving advice to parents who are simply frustrated and discouraged with what's happening with the misinformation that parents and children receive on gender identity. Welcome, Hillary.
Thank you so much for having me.
There's a lot of conflict on what's being taught to children right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to the parents who are discouraged and frustrated by the continuation of misinformation about sexuality and gender identity in the media?
First off, I think sometimes parents think that they're alone. And I think that's kind of what the enemy always tries to make us feel like, that we're alone in this and that everybody else seems to be agreeing with this. So I just want to say, first and foremost, you are not alone. And so I think there can be just kind of some comfort and some power knowing that there are other people around you who do not agree with what's going on. And so if you're really, really frustrated by this, I would like to talk about maybe a couple things that will help empower you to get one step ahead of the curve on this. One thing is the idea of the power of repetition. This is something that basically every ad company knows about, influencers know about that. And it's just this idea that the more you repeat something, the more true it sounds. And I think this is what we have going on both with sexuality and gender identity. There's a book that I read when working on this book called Thinking Fast and Slow by David Kahneman. And he has a quote in there that says, the human brain has a hard time distinguishing between that which is familiar and that which is true. And so if we are by default allowing what the world is saying to just dominate what this repetition, then that's not a good thing. But we can actually counteract that by doing it ourselves, being our own kind of repetition. In fact, the afterword in the book, is called Things to Repeat to Your Kids Until They Want to Gag. Just because repetition by itself is just a tool. And so that's the first thing I would recommend. And secondly, I would say to break down the ideas, because I think the more you break down these ideas, the less sense they make. When you have a good, coherent worldview, when you start explaining it, all of a sudden, all these other aspects of the world start making sense. When you have a bad worldview, it's one of the things where maybe it makes one thing make sense, but then it makes something else really not make sense, and nothing's really gelling together. And I think especially when it comes to what they're saying with gender, it's just confusing for even an adult to really explain how this works together in a cohesive way. So just to be clear, what they're being taught is that gender has nothing to do with your biological sex, that gender is all to do with how you identify in your head. And there's just several problems with that of how do we know how anyone else feels in their head? Like, I don't know what it's like to be you. You don't know what it's like to be me. All I know is what it's like to be me. And this idea that we could not only know what someone else is experienced, but all of the people of the opposite gender, that I would know how all of them experience life to the point of where I can identify, that's how I experience life. That's not a coherent statement. That's not something that's even remotely provable or even possible. So I think really just teaching yourself and learning what the opposition is saying, or what these new teachings are. I think that it's just going to be one of those things that the more you understand it, the more you go, huh? That's what's being taught. And it just doesn't seem so scary anymore because you realize how incoherent it is.
Yeah. I'm telling you, the things that are happening in school, the books that are going through school right now are unbelievable. So Hillary, what are some of the practical ways to teach our kids how to treat those who hold different beliefs?
Yeah. And this is one of the things that I've noticed with kids, that a lot of times, in a good way, we do kind of shelter our kids from other beliefs. We want to make sure that they are very well steeped, marinating, shall we say, in a biblical worldview. But what this can also do is when they encounter other beliefs, I've seen this in my own nephews, that their reaction is, what? That's stupid. Who would believe that? And that's probably not the most gentle or loving or winsome way to respond to someone with different beliefs. And the reason why they react that way is because they've never heard it before. If them and all their friends all believe the same way, and then they hear something that seems completely counterintuitive, I mean, that is going to be the way that they respond. It's going to sound like some flat earth theory out there when it's something that they're missing out on major cultural movements that are going on where people very much believe differently. There's something that my pastor's wife used to say to us, like, if you wanted a good talk about sex, you went to the pastor's house, because our pastor's wife said, I don't want my kids hearing about anything that they haven't heard at my kitchen table first. And so one of the things you want to do is you want to start very slowly introducing some of these other things. So there are a multitude of ways to do this in an organic way. Cartoons is probably one of the biggest ones. In fact, the introduction for our book is my kids' cartoon showed why I needed this book yesterday. We did a crowdsource for moms on our Mama Bear Apologetics website and asked them how many times they've seen LGBTQ characters in their kids' cartoons. And I kid you not, within 1 hour, we had over 150 comments.
Wow.
So if you think your kids aren't being exposed to this, you're wrong. As long as they're old enough to watch cartoons, they're going to start seeing cartoons with 2 moms and 2 dads, or a character that, I watched a Sesame Street one where the little Gonzo character was sad for dress-up day because he wanted to be a princess, not a prince. And so they're going to be seeing these things. So we need to, first off, be kind of talking to our kids. What have you noticed? What have you heard? And then start to explain to them, well, some people think that your gender is based on what's going on in your head. Why do you think that might be a problem? And help reason through it with them to where it's not a surprise when they come across it. And number 2, we want to say that the people who are believing this can be very confused, and we need to love them. We need to turn this into an opportunity for ministry. Because we've got a lot of kids are at this really black and white stage. I'm not sure exactly when they come out of that. And I call it the you're going to hell syndrome. There's this time in their life where basically anything that deviates from the Christian worldview, they just want to say, oh, that means you're going to hell. I know, because I went through this stage when the girl across the street dressed like a witch for Halloween when I was 6. That was the first thing that I said. I was not taught that there are different views on this and how to minister to people. So, so I think, and third on that is when you are the one who's introducing something with your kids, you become the expert. There is a phenomenon, which I keep trying to find the actual name of the phenomenon. It's a psychological phenomenon that the person who introduces a concept to you first automatically becomes the expert in your eyes. And so, if you introduce all these concepts and then say, hey, if you encounter more of this and have any questions, come to me. Don't talk about, if you counter it with somebody else, maybe don't talk to them about it right away. Won't you just come to me, because you don't know what level of tact they're at, shall we say. You will be the expert in their eyes, and they will come to you, and you can help them reason through this without acting shocked when they come across it, which is, I think, probably the best we can hope for certain ages.
So how does your book speak into this so that parents could maybe use it as a guide?
Yeah. So our first and foremost goal with the book is to help parents understand what's going on, because I say it over and over and over in the book. You can't refute that which you don't understand. And apologetics is essentially about refuting bad thinking, but doing it in a winsome, loving, and gracious way. But at the same time, I think parents also need to be, have ideas of what they can do with their kids to help put these into practice. So one of the things I would say, almost every story that you hear from a child who either comes out later with a different sexuality or, comes out transgender, is that they felt like they just never fit in with the kids of their same sex. And so one of the things that I encourage parents to do is to tell their kids, if you see a child that is of the same sex as you, that just doesn't seem like they fit in, to go out of their way. That is how they can be Jesus with skin on, is go and befriend the outcast. You don't befriend the class favorite. Go befriend the one that doesn't have any friends. And who knows, you might be just an object of change in their life. We also talk about different categories that we can start kind of creating in our kids' heads so that we can later on add in things like sexuality and gender and identity, and they kind of have these categories already created in their heads. And so, we have lots of little things kind of towards the end of the chapter, and in the chapters that are specifically have the ROAR format. The ROAR format stands for recognize the message, offer discernment, argue for a healthier approach, and reinforce these ideas with your kids. So the recognize the message is what is actually being said. So let's, look at it just straight up. What's the message that's coming out? Offer discernment, there's 2 steps to that. And I have a little hand gesture that goes along with this when I'm teaching parents, that every idea has a bit of good and bad. Our job is to separate the good from the bad, accept the good, and reject the bad. That's what discernment is. A lot of times people treat discernment as you're just saying, this is what's wrong with the world everywhere. And I don't think that's helpful because most ideas have a kernel of truth in them. So when we can get a bad idea that's overall bad, we can say these were maybe the good intentions, or this is a truth that has been ignored. There's something that we can come and agree on, and then separate it usually from the conclusion or the action steps of what someone thinks we should do about it. Keep the good, reject the bad. When you argue for a healthier approach, you're taking that goodness that you found in that idea and saying, this is actually how Scripture addresses that in a biblical way, to where we're taking something that we already agree on and saying, hey, here's maybe a better way that would have fewer consequences and fewer, a more cohesive worldview to address this problem that we both see. And then reinforcing it with the kids. Here's some activities or some questions that you might want to ask with your kids. And so I think it's chapters 8 through 12. We've got that, the ROAR sections for each of those.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question. I'm going to flip side it now. If parents are getting pushback in school from the higher authorities, the board, whatever, how can they deal with that? How can they voice their opinion? Is there a way? Can you give any advice there?
Yes, I think one of the things that we have absorbed in this culture, and it drives me nuts, honestly, is this idea that the more I feel something, the more true it is. And so we have people that are just trying to outshout each other, and all it's doing is it's getting everyone into a tizzy. And once you have that super emotional brain going, that's going to be your amygdala, you actually turn off the prefrontal cortex, which is the site of rational thinking. I think we need to set this standard of coming in with facts and not just with, I don't like this, or this is, calling it names. This is grooming. This is, all the things where is probably true, but you haven't proven it to be true. I would come in very, very specifically and break it down in front of people while being filmed, and keep your composure, because the media is looking. They are just dying to have these little clips of angered parents that are kind of starting to lose their minds so that they can say, see, we got domestic terrorists coming. And, that sounds like I'm being, exaggerating, but no, that's exactly what's happening right now in some of these school board meetings, is they're actually saying that these parents are domestic terrorists. So we need to lead the charge on how to disagree agreeably, which means that we present with logic, we present with facts, and we present in ways that they cannot refute our reasoning. And also, I think it's been really, really great that, I normally wouldn't say this, some way to actually hold them accountable. I think there was one school board who just refused to acknowledge the fact that there was legitimate pornographic material in these books that they were presenting. And oh my gosh, if you can find that, read it out loud. And as uncomfortable as everybody gets when you read it out loud, that's how inappropriate it is to be there with kids. I would say that would be another one of those facts. You can't deny that this is inappropriate for kids. And there was even one guy who said, unless you step down, I'm a lawyer, here's a lawsuit for providing these for our kids. Now that's a lot. And most parents can't do all of that. But what they can do is they can voice their concerns. They can gather with other parents. They can maybe divvy up whatever people are best at. If you have someone who's a really good speaker, in the sense that they can find those facts and they can keep their calm and work together to present a case, because that's what we want to do. We don't want our voices just to be heard. There's something I emphasize in our first book, that I used to use when I taught high school and middle school. I said, would you rather be heard or would you rather be understood and persuasive? And that is something that I think we all need to, anybody can be heard, anybody, screaming off their whatever, they can be heard, but are they understood and persuasive? If we keep those two things in our mind, that we aim for clarity. If we can't have agreement, let's at least have clarity, and let's aim to be understood and persuasive. But I would also pay attention to just the chain of command. We talk in chapter 5, I believe, about the chain of command. If you have beefs with what's going on in your own classroom, I would also use this opportunity. We want to be salt and light. And if the only time they hear from us is when we're outraged about something, we have not built any trust. All we've said is, all the good, because there probably is some good that they're doing. All the good that you're doing, all I'm seeing is the bad. And that's not a way to endear people to you. That's not a way to be heard. And so look for good things that they're doing. Look for ways that you can volunteer. Look for ways to earn trust and then to be speaking into it. I think those will go a lot longer, a lot further than just coming and yelling about whatever you're upset about.
And the sad thing is I'm thinking, there's like a mass exodus of these parents that are taking their kids out of school and homeschooling them now. Mm-hmm. And how can that really help the ones that are left that are still Christian? Maybe they can't afford, to stay home or whatever. Can you speak into that a little?
I would say I don't blame parents at all for taking their kids out. It's really hard to, if you have a school that really has gone down the way of all these theories, all the gender theories, the sexuality, maybe the critical race theory, they're going to be getting that all day, every day. And if that really is the case, pumping a few Bible verses in them, over dinner in a devotional is not going to prevent them from absorbing the ideas of the world. So I'm a very much a pro homeschooler because I think there's just a lot of good that comes from that. Even with that though, I don't think the public schools are irredeemable. One of the things that our church does that I really, really like is they regularly go and they pray around the school. And a lot of times they get permission from the principal. You can find key people in schools sometimes that are Christians that will say, yes, come pray over my classroom. Sometimes principals. I think people kind of have started seeing it's like the administration and teachers versus the parents. When we have a lot of teachers who are Christians who don't know how to do their job right now without getting fired, and we need to be helping and supporting those teachers instead of just tearing down the whole system, find the ones that are in the system that are trying to enact change from the inside out and see how you can support them. But again, when push comes to shove, I don't blame anyone for wanting to take their child out. I don't think they owe anybody to try to, some people say, let my kids be a missionary in there. Like the quote I said, that which is most familiar becomes what they deem as true. And if you just can't fight that kind of repetition, if they're in a school all day that believes a lot of these kind of cultural lies. So I think there's grace for both sides. Yeah.
So I have 2 more questions for you. One is, how do you turn anxiety into action steps when it comes to these issues?
Yes. And this is something that I think if you look at the acknowledgments at the end of the book, that I actually discussed this briefly, that I say that this book is the epitome of what it takes for me to conquer, what it looks like for me to conquer fear. This whole topic was one of those things where there was just knots and the knots had knots, and then you throw a bunch of spaghetti and then it was just this pile of steaming whatever that I just didn't even want to get into because it was so complicated. So I think fear a lot of times stems from uncertainty. Anxiety stems from uncertainty. And so what I hope that Amy and I did with this book is to kind of bring the reader through that fear. And it's like I was able to come out on the other side, me personally being a lot less fearful because I thought, okay, I finally understand what's going on. I think when you finally understand what's going on and you see all the moving pieces, it doesn't seem as scary anymore. There's like this example of The Simpsons. There was this Simpsons episode long time ago, probably back in the 90s, where they had this meteor that was coming towards the Earth. And everybody was freaking out. Everybody was building these, under bridges. And then, Homer wants to be the one man who can come out and actually see it come. And as it comes down, it just goes boop. And it burned up in the atmosphere to where it was maybe about that big. It was the most just like, oh, well, that one, everybody was ready for Armageddon. That I think from far away, without understanding what's going on, that's what the whole sex, gender, and identity looks like. And everybody's freaking out. And if you can just hold your ground and you can just start understanding it, you finally get it to where it's about the size of a chihuahua in your hand. And you're like, okay, we can tackle that.
Love it. Love it. So Hillary, this is my question to you. How do you see God working in this ministry that you have? How did he come into your life and say, Hillary, I want you to do some exposing here? How did he work?
In general for Mama Bear, or specifically this book?
In general.
Okay. In general, it was three things. Number one, I was made aware by a girl. So I'm a daddy's girl. I've always been comfortable with guys. I was an athletic trainer, sometimes the only woman in the room, going into science, around guys. I had no problem with it. And I had a friend who made me aware that there was a whole demographic of women in the church who wouldn't read something unless it was by a woman for a woman. And that just kind of blew my little brain. Oh my gosh, well, who's giving them apologetics? Because we had so few women in apologetics at the time. I think we had Mary Jo Sharp, and that was it. Mary Jo Sharp, maybe Melissa Cain Travis, and Nancy Piercy. So I started thinking, yeah, and if there's that few, and then who's targeting the moms? Because one of the things I noticed is that every conference that came to a church had childcare except for one kind. Apologetics conferences, for some reason, they never had childcare. So the people that would already normally be interested in it, the dads, go, and someone has to stay and take care of the kids. So mom stays home. And I thought, well, goodness, we have someone who is motivated in every single household to protect her kids, and we're not equipping her. And so that's where, through another series of events, a woman who I knew that was not interested in philosophy, not interested in apologetics, not interested in anything. Her son comes out and says he doesn't believe in God anymore. And that woman became practically a scholar on apologetics topics because she saw that this was coming after her kid. And I thought, that's like an instinct. That's a mama bear instinct. What would happen if we could utilize that mama bear instinct to show this is what's happening to our kids? We would have just an unstoppable army and force of people who we don't demolish people, we demolish arguments raised against the knowledge of God. So that is where just the whole idea came from. And so we started just doing ministry, and within a year we had a publisher asking us to write a book, which that's not the normal way you go about getting book deals. So I think that just speaks to the way God has worked. And then for this particular book, I would say that I was dragged into this topic kicking and screaming. But the Lord orchestrated it after multiple times of it being pitched to me where I finally couldn't say no. And my husband said, Hillary, you need to write this book. If I'd known you turned this down twice before, I would have scolded you. So yeah, I was kind of, and I think it was from the fear of this topic, not only from not understanding, but from the pushback that you'll get from people who just automatically assume that you're hating and you're a bigot and all these things that I just didn't want to be called all that. I just wanted to be faithful to scripture. And I knew that a lot of pushback comes with this topic, and I was afraid of that. And so I chose to act in faith and still do it. But I'm really glad I did, because I think it's a very necessary topic for what is going on right now.
I'm glad you did too. And I thank you so much for joining me. And I do hope you'll come back again.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Hillary. Get Hillary's books, go to mamabearapologetics.com. Thank you for watching The Call with Nancy Sabato, where we are leading you to Christ through stories and teachings.